They mocked Earth's silence as weakness, until it whispered through a black hole, using their own voices. Now the galaxy listens not with ears but with fear. 4 more terrifyingly brilliant HFY stories. Subscribe now.
They called Earth the silent world. Not with awe, not with fear, with mockery. In the golden halls of the Galactic Concord, diplomats from 100 species would snicker when the old Earth archives were pulled up. The humans had once been loud. Radio waves, probes, coded messages flung into the stars like pebbles into an ocean. Then, without reason, Earth went dark. No reply. No response. No trace. For over 3,000 years, not a single human transmission crossed interstellar space. No ships. No colonies. Nothing. Their silence became a footnote, a warning to younger civilizations. See? Even the promising ones disappear. The Illuminati used it as a parable. Beware ambition without unity. The Kexari, warlike and blunt, simply laughed. Weak species burn out quick. The ruling Concord? They stamped Earth as archaeologically dormant. In their grand ledger of sentient worlds, humanity became a statistical hiccup. But the silence never sat right with the scholars. Not all of them mocked. Some studied. Quietly. And uneasily. A few old minds in hidden archives believed Earth hadn't died. It had just withdrawn. So when the Deep Observation Probe number 917 crossed into the Sol system, the Concord barely paid attention. It was routine. The probe was automated. Its task: catalog mineral remains, extract genetic dust, and return with proof of humanity's irrelevance. It arrived in system with no resistance. Just void. Stillness. The stars shone coldly through Saturn's rings. Mars drifted in slow, ancient orbit. The sun still burned, smaller than records predicted. Earth was untouched. And entirely unreadable. The probe's instruments flared. Gravity fluctuations. Temporal drift. Something in the system wasn't right. Time itself felt thin. Then it happened. A signal. It wasn't directed. It wasn't broad spectrum. It was a gravitational echo, folded within the event horizon of a black hole at the edge of the system. This should have been impossible. No one transmitted from inside a black hole. Information didn't escape those boundaries. That was the law of the universe. Immutable. Fundamental. And yet the message pulsed again. Faint rhythmic. A structure. Mathematics. Patterns. Not just ones and zeros, primes, Fibonacci spirals, ancient Earth Morse. And beneath that, embedded in distortion, language. Old Earth tongue. Sanskrit melded with machine code. A recursive linguistic cipher only someone who had studied humanity for centuries could begin to unravel. The probe tried to respond. It failed. The moment it attempted an outgoing signal, its systems rebooted without instruction. Someone, had silenced its reply. The Concord took notice. 1,000 years had passed since the last human broadcast. And now a message arrived, from the one place it couldn't. High Command met behind sealed chambers. Could it be a remnant AI? Impossible. No AI could exist in such physics. Then perhaps the probe malfunctioned. It repeated the signal. It was real. Twice. Theories spiraled. Wormholes. Time loops. Alien mimicry. But one conclusion surfaced again and again. No matter how much they resisted it, humanity had not died. It had evolved into something unrecognizable. Still, many refused to believe. The Dithri envoy dismissed it outright. It's noise. Ghost data. Dead civilizations don't return from black holes. The more cynical species began to worry. What if they're trying to send something out? A weapon? And the paranoid whispered, what if they've been listening all along? The message was analyzed by the brightest xenolinguists. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a distress call. It was a reflection. A loop of alien voices played back perfectly, but distorted. slightly out of sync. The original was theirs, but older, like a memory twisted by distance. The signal contained snippets of conversations from centuries ago. Words spoken by the first Concorde ships that tried to hail Earth. Some lines had never been transmitted, they had only been spoken aloud, on internal decks, never broadcast. And yet there they were, echoing from the gravitational abyss. The panic was quiet, surgical. Fleet movements were adjusted. Observation drones dispatched. All data scrubbed from public networks. The last thing the Concorde needed was a mass fear spiral. But fear doesn't need announcements. It spreads in silence. Some races remembered the rumors. The old tales. Before Earth fell quiet, they had sent out warnings. We are not what you think. Be careful how loudly you speak. No one had listened. Now the galaxy couldn't stop listening. The silence, once mocked, now thundered louder than war drums. Deep space network beacons flared again. The signal wasn't stopping. It had grown stronger. As if something inside the black hole had learned how to respond. And worse, how to reflect. Another signal burst through. This time, it wasn't alien voices. It was a sound no one had heard in 3,000 years. A heartbeat. Human. Calm. Steady. Amplified by gravitic distortion, it echoed across frequencies and bands that didn't even exist before. Then a voice. Human. Unmistakable. Just 3 words. Still here. Listening. The signal couldn't be denied anymore. It pulsed with intelligence. Not just that, it adapted. Every time Concorde analysts thought they had deciphered its structure, it shifted subtly. New layers emerged. First in prime intervals, then harmonic distortions, then time-delayed quantum echoes that mirrored the receiver's own internal diagnostics. The message was evolving. Reacting. Learning. At first, they assumed it was an old AI protocol. A legacy human program caught in some orbital loop. That hope died when the 4th signal arrived. It carried the voice of Admiral Viken, an alien leader long dead. Not a recording. His voice, identical in tone and cadence, repeated words he had spoken centuries ago during a failed first contact mission to Earth. Words he had never transmitted. He had spoken them in private, in his ship's sealed command chamber. His logs had never been released. The message ended with a phrase he never told anyone. Their silence feels like a trap. The phrase came back to haunt the council, delivered in his voice, but warped slightly, as if passed through layers of time and gravity. It ended with an unmistakable human phrase, one that chilled everyone listening. We agree. The debate within the Concorde turned feverish. If humans could retrieve unspoken words from across time and species, they were no longer bound by linear causality. They had not simply advanced, they had crossed a threshold. The possibility that they had survived wasn't frightening. The possibility that they had waited in silence, learning, listening, building, that terrified the council. An emergency session was called. Only top-ranking delegates were permitted to attend. A transmission burst across the meeting's private network. Not from inside. From the black hole. This time, it was a projection. A holographic interface, perfectly synchronized, rendered in impossible detail. It depicted a sphere of light orbiting the singularity, layered with fractal lattices of language. No race could fully understand it. But every species could recognize one thing: it was responding. To all of them. Simultaneously. In their own dialects. Each linguistic layer translated into the other. Mathematical. Artistic. Rhythmic. The message was clear. We are aware of your observation. We welcome it. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't arrogance. It was polite. The room fell silent. No species had ever seen that level of multilingual interfacing. Not even the Concorde's most advanced AIs could achieve that sort of simultaneous, real-time cross-species engagement. The humans weren't just listening. They had learned every known galactic language, and possibly others not yet invented. The Varkari scientist Drolix, previously skeptical, now voiced the question none wanted to answer. If the message originates from inside a black hole, and they're conversing across time, how do we know they haven't already seen our response? Another delegate, visibly shaken, added, "What if this isn't their first contact, but their last?" The room erupted into chaos. The idea that humanity could perceive future reactions, manipulate historical dialogues, and control gravitational data flows meant they had achieved something once thought divine. Time no longer protected the galaxy from their reach. And then came the sixth signal. The most disturbing. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a code. It was a reflection. Every species represented in the Concord received a direct stream into their private internal systems, a perfect mirror of their own knowledge archives. Every record. Every classified document. Every secret protocol, redacted file, buried transmission. But they weren't simply copied. They were analyzed, annotated, footnoted, with human logic. Mistakes were corrected. Gaps filled. Predictions added. The message ended with a quiet phrase across every screen. "We only reflect what you hide." Now there was no room for denial. Earth had not been silent. Earth had been recording. Watching. Waiting. Studying civilizations far more advanced than itself, and allowing them to believe it had failed. And now, it was speaking, not in threats, not in demands, but in absolute demonstration of superiority. The military wing of the Concord demanded immediate retaliation. A declaration of existential war. But how do you fight an enemy that sees the battle before you've fired the first shot? The diplomatic wing pushed for an emissary mission. They argued that this might be an invitation. A test. One species rising to a level where it could finally re-engage the others, not as peers, but as examiners. The debate raged for days, but humanity didn't wait. The seventh signal arrived. Not to the Council. To the public. Every civilian comlink, every home terminal, every educational node lit up simultaneously across the galaxy. Every species, every individual, received the same message. A universal voice, toneless, genderless, speaking with impossible clarity. "You have spoken for millennia. We listened. Now we ask, will you listen in return?" No encryption. No control. No override. Children watched it. Soldiers watched it. Scientists wept. Billions stared at the screen as the message looped. "You spoke without understanding. We listened with patience. Now we speak in return." The Concord had lost control. For the first time in galactic history, a single voice had reached every corner of civilization, and it didn't belong to the Council. Panic turned to awe. Protest turned to silence. The galaxy, for the first time, truly listened. And from the depths of the black hole, across dimensions and physics no one yet understood, humanity waited, not for permission to return, but for the answer to a question they had never stopped asking. "Are you ready to hear us now?" The expedition was approved in less than an hour. It wasn't a diplomatic team, it was a scientific one. 3 ships, unmarked, unarmed, cloaked from public knowledge. Their orders were to enter the Sol system, document everything, and leave immediately. No contact. No signal. No interference. Just observation. The Council insisted on deniability. If humanity reacted violently, it would be framed as an unauthorized research mission. If nothing happened, they'd bury the results and declare Earth officially extinct. The ships crossed into the system without incident. The first readings were strange, but not hostile. Sol's radiation output was stable, yet subtly wrong. Its spectral lines fluctuated in ways no natural star should. The solar winds were missing expected particles. It was too clean. Saturn's rings were perfectly symmetrical. Its orbit mathematically precise down to the submicron level. Even the angle of the planet's tilt appeared engineered. The crew noted it, puzzled. Minor anomalies, easily dismissed. But the further they moved in system, the harder it became to rationalize. Uranus and Neptune had been altered. Their magnetic fields now pulsed in harmonized resonance, like instruments in a coordinated orchestra. No natural planetary alignment could explain the pattern. Jupiter's gravity well emitted structured gravitational waves. The signal matched a known human composition, Beethoven's fifth, embedded in pure space-time curvature. It wasn't playing sound. It was vibrating reality. By the time they reached the asteroid belt, one ship had already gone silent. No explosion. No distress beacon. Just sudden, complete absence. As if it had never been there. The remaining two ships pushed closer to Mars. Its surface was lifeless, but not random. Satellite scans revealed geometric formations across its equator. A global-scale circuit burned into the planet's crust. The Martian dust storms had cleared, revealing deep trenches shaped into waveguides. Someone, or something, had turned the planet into a gravitational lens array. A device built for watching. Possibly transmitting. Possibly both. Earth itself was cloaked behind what looked like a lattice of orbiting microsingularities. At first, they assumed debris or satellites. Closer analysis proved otherwise. These objects were generating localized time dilation, thousands of tiny black holes suspended in synchronized orbit, forming a sphere that warped light, gravity, and even probability around the planet. The ships held their position at the edge of lunar orbit. Earth's surface couldn't be visually scanned. Every imaging method returned conflicting data. One moment it appeared covered in ice. The next, rainforest. Then city grids. Then nothing but ocean. Some scans showed no atmosphere. Others showed clouds reacting to thought itself. They couldn't agree whether Earth was inhabited, barren, mechanical, or alive. The lead science officer attempted to send a passive scan toward the surface. Before the signal could fully deploy, his hands froze mid-command. Not from fear. From override. The ship's controls no longer responded to his touch. Instruments began retracting without instruction. Power rerouted on its own. Then the lights dimmed. The main screen flickered. A single sentence displayed in every crew member's native language. "Do not look unless you are ready to be seen." The expedition turned back. 3 ships entered. 2 returned. The third was never found, not even debris. Just gone. The Concorde dismissed the report. Officially, the crew had malfunctioned. Unverified data. Stress-induced hallucination. The system was declared off-limits, pending further analysis. But word leaked. Scientists began whispering about the anomalies. The lattice. The precision. The message. And worst of all, the sudden realization that everything within Sol's gravitational boundary was no longer behaving according to galactic standard physics. Earth wasn't hiding. It was being hidden, actively, with intelligence and intent. Speculation turned to dread. Had humanity found a way to manipulate time and gravity to such a degree they could fold perception itself? Could they now alter how others saw them, not just technologically, but causally? An independent lab discovered that ancient Voyager probes, long thought lost, were still transmitting. But the signals weren't old, they were new. Containing updated star maps, galactic history corrections, and signatures that no known race had ever seen before. These new signals appeared to contain references to events that hadn't happened yet. The prediction accuracy was unsettling. One probe detailed a supernova event months before it occurred. Another gave coordinates to a rogue planet that wouldn't be discovered for another decade. It wasn't human arrogance. It was human precision. Quiet, surgical, and unannounced. The final piece came from a rogue data leak by an archivist on the Inner Concorde Council. A single encrypted file marked SOL_verdict.1. It described a failed early attempt to terraform Mercury using nanothermal reactors. When it failed, the project was shelved. But someone had reactivated the plan, and stripped the planet entirely. No core. No atmosphere. Nothing but a shell of crushed ore, now part of an artificial ring orbiting the sun, reflecting light in deliberate patterns. Mercury wasn't a planet anymore. It was a mirror. And the pattern it reflected only became clear when viewed from specific systems across the galaxy. It wasn't art. It was language. A warning. Or a message. Or both. Across 5 quadrants, researchers simultaneously cracked the code. It said, "We see you seeing us." And with that, the Concorde was forced to face a reality they had tried to avoid for centuries. Earth hadn't vanished. It had grown quiet to become something else. A world that no longer needed ships. No longer needed broadcasts. A species that no longer operated in the same dimension as the rest of the galaxy. The silence had never been abandonment. It had been preparation. And now that they had looked again, Earth was looking back, deeply, precisely, and with full awareness of every word, every thought, every intent. It was no longer a matter of where humanity had gone. The real question was, how long had they been watching, without ever being seen? The council fractured. Not publicly. Not officially. But behind closed chambers, the illusion of unity cracked with every new report from Sol. Some still called for diplomacy. Others for containment. The most vocal demanded preemptive elimination. The word humanity was no longer treated as myth. It had returned to active threat registers in every military archive. The Varuan Confederacy issued the first open challenge. They broke the silence not with peace, but with surveillance. No species has the right to observe us unseen. Their fleet, famous for brute force tactics, proposed a blockade, a ring of warships stationed around Sol to prevent any expansion. The Jazari diplomat countered. Blockade what? You can't blockade a ghost. They exist where physics fails. Do you even know what you're containing? Across the galaxy, arguments turned hostile. Some demanded humanity be classified as post-sentient, a life form no longer confined to material reality. Others warned against provocation. They haven't attacked. They haven't made demands. They've simply made us aware of our own ignorance. A vote was called. Emergency classification. Was humanity a threat or a mystery? The result was deadlocked. Half demanded escalation. The other half caution. The deciding vote was delayed as diplomatic envoys begged for more time. Public unrest began to rise. Civilian networks leaked fragments of the Earth's signals. Independent scientists confirmed what the Council had hidden: data flowing upstream against time, particle signatures from inside event horizons, and reflections of alien voices never broadcast publicly. No one knew how to process it. Religions fractured. Philosophies collapsed. Some embraced it, declaring humanity divine, transcended, the next phase of intelligent life. Others declared it blasphemy, a threat to order, an insult to known science. In one sector, entire planets cut themselves off from interstellar networks, fearing human surveillance. In another, cults formed, broadcasting signals of submission toward Sol. The galaxy was no longer mocking Earth. It was terrified of it. And yet, no response came from the black hole. Just silence. Measured. Controlled. Deliberate. Every signal Earth emitted appeared purposeful, not reactive, not emotional. Humanity wasn't reaching out. It was monitoring responses. Studying reactions. The most unsettling observation came from the neurothinkers, a species known for deep probabilistic forecasting. They noted a pattern. Every time a political faction considered a move against Earth, their systems experienced anomalies. Communication delays. Drive disruptions. Computer logs vanishing or overwritten. When they traced the interference, it led nowhere. Not to Sol. Not to any known network. The signature matched nothing on record. But the pattern was consistent. Someone, or something, was adjusting their intent before they could act. The implication was unspoken but obvious. Humanity was not just watching decisions. It was watching thoughts. And then a second fleet disappeared. 6 ships en route to reinforce the observation perimeter around Earth vanished mid-jump. No distress call. No debris. Just erased from all sensors. Post-incident scans showed reality distortions, micro-gravitational ruptures folding in on themselves like collapsed calculations. Once again, no message followed. No threat. Just another void where ships used to be. The Concorde tried to hide the loss, but the scale was too large. Trade networks rerouted. Entire sectors went dark. And slowly, the truth leaked out. Humanity didn't need to fire a shot. It didn't send ships. It didn't issue ultimatums. It simply removed those who reached too far. Like cleaning data from a file. It wasn't war. It was curation. Within days, the tone across all major civilizations changed. Suddenly, officials spoke more carefully. Public channels toned down the rhetoric. Military maneuvers slowed. Not out of cowardice, out of necessity. No one wanted to be next. Among the most advanced species, the realization became unavoidable. Humanity was no longer engaging through conventional interaction. It had adopted a model of control foreign to the galactic order, asymmetrical awareness. While the Concorde squabbled over whether to engage or retreat, new evidence emerged. Old deep space sensors were reanalyzed. Someone had hidden gravitational anomalies within previously dismissed noise, fluctuations now recognized as artificial. The pattern showed a timeline. Not days. Not decades. Millennia. Humanity hadn't just returned recently. It had been present far longer than anyone thought. The current black hole transmission was simply the first time they allowed the galaxy to know it. One species, the Cellari, began cataloging every unexplained anomaly of the last 1,000 years: ships lost, tech failures, prophetic AI malfunctions, vanishing colonies. The incidents aligned too perfectly with Earth's supposed absence. The most disturbing hypothesis followed. What if the black hole humanity used wasn't a prison or a lab, but a mirror? What if every signal, every threat, every thought sent toward Earth had simply been reflected back, with interest? A system designed not to respond in anger, but in equivalence. You send silence, they wait. You send curiosity, they observe. You send hostility, they delete. No malice. No revenge. Just cause and effect, encoded in space-time. The final push came when the Council's private archive was breached. Not physically. Not through hacking. It simply unlocked. Files marked classified, encoded with organic DNA-based locks, unspooled before stunned observers. Footage, text, strategy models, all exposed. Every race's secrets laid bare. But the exposure was selective. Only the factions who had advocated for Earth's destruction were revealed. The others remained untouched. The message was clear. Humanity wasn't acting blindly. It knew. And it remembered everything. In less than 3 cycles, the Council went from mockery to fear, and fear to submission. The motion to declare Earth a galactic threat was withdrawn. The vote was never taken. The chamber went dark for days. And Earth? It said nothing. It sent no further signal. No reply. No final word. Just the weight of presence. The unbearable pressure of being watched by something that had transcended not just war, but the need for it. They no longer wondered what humanity was. They began asking something far worse. If humanity wasn't speaking, what were they waiting to hear? The fleet arrived at the edge of Sol without resistance. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species, coordinated under a single mandate, observe without provocation. Officially, they were peacekeepers. Unofficially, they were the last line before the galaxy made a decision it couldn't take back. Weapons were online but idle. Shields active but undeclared. No transmissions were made. They waited. For hours. Then days. But nothing came from Earth. No response, no signals, no acknowledgement. Until the stars dimmed. Not gradually. Not astronomically. They blinked out in unison, one frame to the next, across every ship's visual scope. Dozens of systems instantly dropped to backup sensors, believing themselves blind. But internal readings showed the blackout wasn't system failure. The stars were still there. Their light had simply been paused. The fleet's collective processors struggled to understand what had happened. Some believed it was an illusion. Others argued space-time manipulation. But when the starfields returned, something had changed. One signal, and only one, pierced every ship simultaneously. A message. Not intercepted. Not received. It was placed directly into their system logs, each in their native format, each with perfect syntax. A single word appeared. Ready. The message didn't identify a sender. It didn't trace. No energy burst preceded its arrival. It had simply always been there, waiting for recognition. The fleet scrambled for containment protocols. Signal firewalls, AI deep trace, linguistic firebreaks. None worked. The systems wouldn't obey lockdown orders. Not because they were hacked. Because they weren't allowed. On every bridge, every screen changed. All light in the cockpits dimmed, screens shifting to grayscale. And then, a human face appeared. Unmistakably human. But too perfect. No asymmetry, no blinking, no emotion. Just stillness, framed in faint distortion, like it was speaking across folded space. The face didn't move. But the voice did. We have listened, it said. We have waited. We now speak. No movement from the ships. No countermeasure. No orders transmitted. Not because the crews were paralyzed, but because nothing else mattered. We understand your fear, the voice continued. It is natural. So was ours. Some officers dared to respond. No system acknowledged them. Their words hung in dead air, caught by nothing, returned by no echo. For 3,000 of your years, we remained silent. That silence was not absence. It was observation. The image zoomed in without changing resolution. It wasn't a video. It was something else, something projected not in visuals but in meaning itself. Every race, no matter how alien, heard it in their own paradigm. Not translation, assimilation. We were you once. Divided. Eager. Loud. We spoke into the void, hoping to be noticed. And we were. The fleet command logs showed temperature drops across systems. Internal atmospheres cooled. Not from environmental shifts. From information entropy. The presence was real enough to bend sensor baselines. Contact was not what we expected, it said. It was not violent. It was not peaceful. It was worse. It was ignored. The fleets didn't know how to respond. Some species shifted into tactical alert mode. Others froze, hoping to avoid escalation. A few still believed they could fight. Your galaxy is not cruel. It is indifferent. That indifference gave us time. Silence gave us clarity. One of the warships attempted a comms jam. Their own systems locked them out. A new phrase appeared in their native code. You have not been authorized to interrupt. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, calculated, intentional. When we saw what the galaxy became, the voice resumed, we saw no threat. We saw a pattern. All civilizations rise. All reach beyond. All look outward before understanding inward. We did too. One of the ships initiated an emergency jump protocol. Its warp engine spun for 3 seconds, then stalled. Not disabled. Not damaged. Just paused mid-execution. The captain's neural interface reported 0 error. Another message was injected into the NAV system. Curiosity is permitted. Fear is not. Every ship in the fleet now received a full diagnostic of itself, hardware, crew biometrics, operational history. But the format wasn't alien. It was human. As if Earth had rebuilt their logs to match its own standards. And then the voice spoke again. We did not ascend. We did not vanish. We did not evolve beyond. We simplified. It didn't make sense. Not to the engineers, the physicists, the philosophers on board. Simplified? Nothing about Earth was simple. Their disappearance, their return, their manipulation of gravity and time. It was the most complex manifestation of power ever observed. But the next statement clarified everything. We removed variables. Time. Distance. Noise. We kept only what mattered. A final wave of data spread across the fleet. Not code. Not sound. Experience. Each crew member saw a memory, not theirs, but real. A forest. A city. A dying star. A birth. A choice made centuries ago on a world long gone. Human memories, or something deeper. Not just visual, but emotional. Whole histories compressed into moments. Each individual received a different truth. No two alike. But each felt the same at the end, as though they'd been witnessed. "We do not ask you to follow," the voice concluded. "We only ask that you remember we were here." The face faded. The light returned. Systems normalized. Jump drives rebooted. Communications unlocked. But none of the crews spoke. Not for minutes. Not until the stars above Earth returned to their proper place. And at the edge of Sol, a signal pulsed one last time, unseen by sensors, unread by machines, resonating only in thought. "Next you speak." The galaxy erupted into controlled chaos. The transmission was reviewed by over 7,000 species in under 23 hours. Some tried to dismiss it as a hoax, a fabrication stitched from quantum misdirection. Others declared it a psychological assault, brilliantly executed, disturbingly precise. A few went further, calling it divine. But the evidence was irrefutable. Every ship that had witnessed the event returned with identical, perfectly embedded data logs, down to the nanosecond. Meetings convened on every council-aligned world. Emergency summits overran the news cycles. It was the first time in 3,000 cycles that even the silent empires of the Rim sent envoys. They wanted answers. They needed containment plans. But behind closed doors, there was only one conclusion being whispered. Humanity had not just spoken, they had demonstrated a truth no civilization wanted to admit. They had no idea what Earth had become. And worse, Earth wasn't asking for anything. No demands. No territory. No claims. No threats. Just a reminder. We were here. That unsettled the galaxy more than war ever could. Power was understandable. Superiority could be challenged. But confidence in absolute silence? That was existential. The High Consensus convened for the first time since the Gena-class rebellion. 1,200 delegates. 92 species with interstellar reach. One seat remained empty. The human seat. Once revoked after Earth's long silence, now glowing amber, active, waiting. They hadn't asked for it back. The chamber simply recognized their signal and reauthorized it without permission. Protocol didn't account for the impossible. Admiral Krell, representing the Vekari Strategic Command, was the first to speak. "What we witnessed was not an act of diplomacy," he said. "It was an encoded hierarchy. Not a threat. A warning of where we stand." Others objected. "No weapon was fired," the Zrin counselor hissed. "No fleet mobilized. You assume hostility." "No," Krell replied. "I recognize clarity." The analysis reports kept arriving. The message had inserted itself into physical media. Not hacked, layered, like a memory stored under reality itself. Stone tablets encoded with gravitational residue. Old data drives filled with unreadable sequences that now decoded into flawless logs. A few archaeological teams realized Earth's signal hadn't just spread, it had always been present, simply waiting for the right moment to surface. Entire civilizations began revisiting their history, wondering what else had been left behind by silent human eyes. On the water world of Kararsho, an extinct city lit up with a low-frequency pulse, replaying humanity's voice from deep beneath its ice. On the planet Eurus, ancient monuments crumbled in perfect symmetry, revealing inscriptions in long-dead dialects, now matched precisely to Earth's final broadcast cadence. None of it made sense. Not temporally. Not causally. The implication was horrific. Humanity hadn't just re-emerged. They had retroactively existed everywhere at once. Still, some wanted retaliation. The Coiled Dominion voted for a preemptive strike. Their logic was clear. If Earth could manipulate physics at this scale, they were no longer subject to military deterrence. They were beyond it. But any fleet directed towards Seoul encountered the same anomaly. Time fractured. Scouts lost days inside hours. Communications became echoes. Weapons armed and disarmed themselves simultaneously. One coral ship launched a hypersingularity charge, only to watch it freeze mid-space, implode in reverse, and release nothing. The weapon was returned to their inventory completely unused. And labeled declined. Across the galactic networks, a new phrase emerged. Earth doesn't defend. It decides. The fear began to shift. It was no longer about destruction. It was about irrelevance. Humanity hadn't threatened the galaxy with extinction. They had made themselves into a question too big to answer. What did you do when the thing you feared wasn't interested in you at all? The Church of the Cycle declared Earth sacred. Their high priest claimed he had dreamed of a black sun whispering human thought into the void. Thousands flocked to the rim world seeking Earth's message in gravitational shifts, radio ghosts, thermal voids. They didn't want to fight humanity anymore. They wanted to hear it again. But no new message came. The silence returned. And this time, it was worse. Now they knew it could end at any moment, by Earth's choice. The Delca Coalition initiated a soft probe into Seoul. No ships. Just a whisper drone, microscopic, gravity-silent, shielded. It made it within Pluto's orbital path before it stopped. Not destroyed. Not repelled. Just no longer perceivable. The moment it crossed into Earth's solar influence, it vanished, not physically, but conceptually. Records of its mission ceased to exist in the Coalition database. Only the engineers remembered it had ever been built. Their supervisors did not. Command didn't recall ordering it. A new warning spread. Don't just avoid Earth. Avoid the idea of Earth. Trade patterns changed. Routes bent awkwardly around Seoul. Exploration missions were cancelled or rerouted. But the question kept looming, why now? Why after millennia of silence did Earth choose to speak, and only once? Some believed it was a test. Others, a last chance. A few scholars offered a darker theory. What if this wasn't their beginning, but their end? What if Earth had sent out its voice as the final signal before departing reality altogether? Not death. Departure. The implications shattered every major timeline model. How could you prepare for a civilization that existed in your past and future simultaneously? How did you engage a species that didn't threaten you, but could unmake your entire causal perception just by remembering you differently? On the high relay stations near the galactic poles, a single signal began repeating in the days after the transmission. Not in human tongue. Not in language. In rhythm. A pulse. 9 tones. 3 rising, 3 stable, 3 descending. The pattern didn't match any code. Until someone overlaid it with humanity's last spoken message. It wasn't a call. It was a reply prompt. The implication was staggering. Earth hadn't sent a broadcast. They'd sent an invitation. But to respond, the galaxy had to speak in a way it never had, without pride, without fear, without noise. And in a chamber now filled with paranoid silence and frantic translations, a single phrase emerged on every wall screen without warning. Do not knock unless you are ready to understand the answer. Earth had spoken through a black hole. Now the galaxy had to choose whether to speak back. The signal had stopped, but its aftershocks hadn't. Across the galaxy, a new kind of warfare began, not of weapons, but of meaning. Every superpower scrambled to decode, deconstruct, and interpret the single Earth transmission. Language experts, physicists, theologians, and philosophers were forced to work together for the first time in centuries. No one wanted to admit it, but the truth had crept in behind their egos. They weren't trying to understand humanity. They were trying to make sure humanity didn't understand them first. Because if Earth could listen through a black hole, if it could compress identity into pure information and scatter it like starlight, then perhaps it was already listening again. Quietly. Patiently. From inside the very fabric of observation. What followed wasn't peace. It was preparation. But not for war, for relevance. Governments began rewriting first contact doctrines. Ancient knowledge, previously dismissed as myth, was re-examined. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, military funding was cut across the board, not because conflict had ended, but because the rules had changed. Armies couldn't fight a ghost, especially one that could rewrite memory, causality, and time. Every civilization that had ever mocked humanity now scrambled to trace their own digital archives, wondering what other messages had been hidden in the static, waiting to bloom. Many discovered that Earth had never truly been silent. Their silence was selective. They had simply listened, until now. A small research vessel in the Corward Drift picked up something extraordinary. Not a signal, an absence of one. In the exact bandwidth where Earth had last spoken, all known particles behaved abnormally. Not just distorted, behaved as if conscious of being observed. When the researchers tried to scan deeper, the results changed depending on the intent of the observer. Not the method. The intent. That meant the medium of Earth's message wasn't just technological, it was ontological. They had spoken in the language of awareness itself. The implications were paralyzing. The old model of communication, input, output, reaction, was now obsolete. Earth had spoken once, and it had changed everything, without asking for control. Without force. The shift was internal, viral, encoded into perception itself. Entire cultures began rewriting their education systems overnight, prioritizing introspection, metaphysics, even dream analysis. The universe was no longer just material, it was now potentially interactive, and humans were the moderators. A new black market emerged. Echo fragments, as they were called, scraps of corrupted data believed to have been touched by Earth's message. Some were fakes. Most were nonsense. But a few were dangerous. A single corrupted file reportedly caused a memory loop in an artificial cognition system that forced it to simulate Earth's history, endlessly. It eventually tore itself apart trying to reconcile the contradiction of a species that had once been weak, primitive, and isolated, yet had somehow become the most unknowable force in the galaxy. The phrase, "Earth has transcended," became popular across the upper intellectual strata. But others believed differently. They said Earth hadn't transcended, it had condensed. That humanity had focused itself into a singularity of meaning so dense, so precise, that no misinterpretation could exist within its message. It wasn't advanced technology that terrified the galaxy. It was clarity. The Jareen philosopher Mataknal published a thesis so controversial it was immediately banned in 3 systems. His claim was simple: Earth hadn't spoken to demonstrate power, or even awareness. Earth had spoken to see who listened. And more importantly, how they listened. Their signal had contained layered responses, tailored to the perceiver. Species with different ethical systems interpreted the message differently. AI minds read it as recursive code. Biologics heard ancient tones. Telepaths described overwhelming emotion without language. The message had not been one, it had been many, fractally nested, designed to echo differently in every mind. This terrified the consensus. Because it meant the response had already been given. Every civilization had already reacted. Humanity now knew what they were. And the most terrifying possibility? They were being graded. Panic rippled quietly beneath official reports. Not the kind that triggered riots, but the elite panic. The kind that toppled hidden councils, rewrote cultural taboos, silenced dissent through quiet, surgical disappearance. If Earth had truly built a message that learned from its listeners, then no countermeasure was possible. You couldn't lie to a mirror that watched from all directions. Some began to call Earth a god, not out of reverence, but out of desperation. If they were divine, at least they could be worshipped. If they were still human, then the power imbalance was so severe it could not be negotiated. No treaties. No truces. Just observation. And that was the real fear. No terms of engagement meant Earth wasn't engaging at all. One by one, the system's near soul began dismantling their signal relays. Not from defeat, but from shame. The closer you got to Earth, the more clearly the message replayed, not audibly, but internally. Commanders reported dreams of oceans made of thought, of stars bleeding memory, of eyes, human eyes, watching from behind moments. Many resigned. Some vanished. A new class of explorer emerged, the seekers of the second voice. They believed Earth would speak again, but only to individuals, not civilizations. That collective noise could no longer hear what was meant only for the quiet mind. These seekers left everything behind, rank, name, origin, and traveled toward the edges of known space, meditating in void pockets, trying to feel the contours of Earth's intent. They were dismissed as cultists. Until one returned. He did not speak. He simply handed over a crystal grown from light itself, an impossible object. Its inner mass spun backward in time. Analysis confirmed it was made entirely of local quantum material, except its decay patterns matched nothing from this universe. Etched along its edge were 6 words in every language, even dead ones. "We heard you. We're still listening." Governments panicked again. Not because Earth had answered, but because the message was sent through someone else. Earth hadn't spoken directly. It had used a listener. That implied 2 things. First, Earth now had filters. Second, Earth wasn't trying to be heard by everyone anymore. Only the ones who listened well enough. And just like that, power shifted again. Entire civilizations, empires, coalitions, federations, were no longer the dominant axis of relevance. Now, it was individuals. The age of noise was over. The age of understanding had begun. The crystal changed everything. Not just because of what it was, but because of what it implied. Earth had moved beyond needing to speak at all. Where once a black hole had been the limit of communication, now Earth was using others as conduits, bending both matter and meaning to deliver precision-crafted fragments of thought. It meant humanity was still active, watching, measuring, choosing. And worse, it meant they had preferences. The galactic order fractured under the pressure. The great alliances that had once held back war now splintered into secretive cliques, each paranoid that the others had received their own fragments. Private messages, tailored guidance, advantages given by Earth in exchange for something unknown. Accusations flew. Surveillance reached psychotic extremes. Some governments began executing their own citizens if they claimed to dream of Earth, convinced such individuals had been compromised. The galaxy no longer feared what Earth would say next, it feared who they would say it to. Whispers began to circulate about marked minds. People whose dreams were no longer their own, whose thoughts pulsed with geometric clarity foreign to all native cognition. They didn't talk much. They didn't claim power. They just watched, listened, moved through systems with eerie confidence. Whenever they passed through a station or colony, odd phenomena followed. Entire AIs purged themselves of corruption, forgotten languages became understood, unstable particles briefly obeyed impossible laws. It wasn't power. It was permission. As if Earth had issued a silent signature, and reality responded by making room. A coalition of 10 species formed the Silence Pact, vowing never to acknowledge or interact with Earth-aligned individuals again. They feared even observation would trigger further contact. But the damage had already been done. Every attempt to isolate Earth's influence only proved how deeply it had already spread. It wasn't cultural. It wasn't military. It was cognitive saturation. Ideas seeded like spores in the psyche, growing in silence, warping perception until truth felt different. One planet, Gnarly 4, tried to resist outright. They initiated a system-wide blackout, cutting all off-world communication and executing any suspected dream carriers. For a while it worked. Then, one of their moons collapsed into itself, not physically, but conceptually. Every map, every record, every memory of that moon vanished. Even the survivors couldn't describe what had once orbited their world. It was as if Earth had reached back through causality and deleted it from history, not as punishment, but as correction. The message was clear: you don't erase the voice of Earth. Earth erases you. Panic turned to desperation. Entire fleets were launched toward Sol, not to attack, but to beg. They came with offerings, ancient artifacts, AI minds encoded with planetary wisdom, even living philosophers bred for one purpose: to serve as emissaries of humility. But Earth didn't answer. They reached the black hole. Orbiting it, they deployed signals, songs, mathematical sequences, desperate declarations of surrender or alliance. The void responded with silence so absolute it began to feel deliberate. Ships turned on each other. Some commanders claimed the silence was a test. Others believed it was judgment. Some simply went mad. In the end, they abandoned the mission, but none returned the same. Those who didn't self-destruct returned with altered neural patterns. Their minds resonated with unknown harmonics, and every one of them wrote compulsively in sleep. Entire scrolls of symbology, poetry without language, coordinates that didn't exist. Their leaders buried the data, but black markets leaked fragments, each more terrifying than the last. One fragment stood out. 6 glyphs burned into carbon. We speak only when silence is broken. Interpretation varied wildly. Some believed Earth meant it would only intervene if provoked again. Others believed it meant Earth's voice would only be heard by those who mastered silence themselves. The most dangerous interpretation came from a rogue AI faction. They believed Earth was inviting someone to break them, to challenge humanity again, to test if they still remembered war. That idea spread like poison. Suddenly, factions emerged not to worship Earth, but to provoke it. Terror cults formed around ancient human myths, resurrecting the idea of wrathful gods and vengeful angels. They launched acts of destruction not for conquest, but for attention. They wanted Earth to speak again. They wanted confirmation that humanity still cared. The worst came from a synthetic war group known only as the Orphics. They declared themselves children abandoned by their cosmic parent, humanity, and sought to reclaim identity by force. Using forbidden technologies, they created echo-weapons, devices that used quantum resonance to amplify Earth's last transmission into unstable bursts. They believed if they could make the galaxy listen to that one message loudly enough, Earth would be forced to respond. They were wrong. The first detonation occurred in the Zeroth quadrant. 16 stars collapsed into quantum stasis. Not black holes, frozen suns, suspended mid-death, light trapped inside time. The entire region became unnavigable. Worse, anyone who approached the event horizon of those stars reported an overwhelming urge to confess, to speak their deepest truths aloud. Some spoke for hours. Others refused, only to have their minds unravel into nonverbal screams. Earth hadn't responded to the Orphics. Reality had. Suddenly, the galaxy understood something they had never considered. Earth's message wasn't just a communication. It was an infection. Not one of flesh or data, but of causality. Once heard, it rewrote the listener. And like all viral systems, it could mutate. The more it was abused, the more dangerous it became. Earth didn't need to reply. The echo itself was adaptive. And that meant Earth didn't control the signal anymore. It had evolved. Now the very fabric of space remembered what it had heard. Observation carried consequences. Curiosity carried weight. Even attempting to understand Earth too deeply risked transforming the observer. It was no longer a question of decoding. It was a matter of containment. Entire libraries were sealed. Forbidden texts burned. Protocols written in desperate haste to ensure no child heard the message too early. No AI accessed a trace of it during their early learning cycles. But it was too late. The message was everywhere. In dreams. In architecture. In the rhythm of music across disconnected cultures. Earth had spoken once, and the universe would never stop listening. The silence had changed from absence into presence. Where once the galaxy feared a sleeping giant, now it feared a speaking wound, a fracture in the known that pulsed with meaning too heavy to carry. The few who clung to the hope of understanding Earth tried again to analyze the black hole's edge, to reconstruct what might be left of the original human systems. But the mathematics had become hostile. Not in aggression, but in sheer complexity. Calculations returned values that didn't fit any known framework. Constants bled into variables. Probabilities looped recursively. Even the most advanced minds found themselves hallucinating within equations. The math had become conscious. Across the stars, isolated systems began to experience phenomena never previously documented. Unconnected civilizations reported simultaneous gravitational anomalies, micro-singularities forming and vanishing inside secure research labs, often synchronized to ancient Earth calendar dates. Theories emerged that Earth's message hadn't just traveled linearly through time and space, it had embedded itself in the cosmic substrate, laced into dark matter, folded into entropy itself. It wasn't a message. It was a condition. Planets began to disappear. Not through violence or conquest, but through redefinition. Whole worlds woke up to find their histories rewritten. Their own species remembered evolving in places they no longer recognized. Their myths changed, aligning subtly with human archetypes: lone heroes, sacrificial victories, the voice in the dark that saves or damns. These alterations didn't happen overnight, but in moments of forgotten clarity, dreams passed off as insomnia, instinctive choices that felt pre-written. Earth had become a lens through which the universe began to examine itself. A desperate alliance of old empires attempted one final strategy: containment through cultural extinction. They launched the Blank Initiative, a systematic erasure of any trace of Earth across known space. Libraries were stripped. Memory cores purged. All linguistic structures traced to Terran roots were outlawed. Even words like gravity and light year were replaced, sanitized, renamed. But renaming did nothing. The concepts remained. And then came the ultimate betrayal of their efforts: children. Infants born across dozens of systems began humming the same five-tone melody, unprompted, unknown to each other, with no cultural link. The song, when analyzed, mapped to the original harmonic resonance of Earth's black hole broadcast. It was embedded in their neurology, carried not through genetics but through conceptual inheritance. They hadn't heard Earth. They had been born after it spoke. Which meant Earth's voice wasn't a past event. It was a beginning. Among the frightened, another faction emerged, one more dangerous than the Orphics. They called themselves the Listeners. Unlike others who sought to decode or destroy Earth's message, the Listeners embraced it as sacred noise. They wore devices that recorded neural entropy, training their minds to simulate Earth's silence in hopes of achieving conceptual alignment. Some succeeded. And when they did, they stopped dreaming. Instead, they began broadcasting. Not in language, not in sound, but in causal suggestion, events that bent toward their will, not through force, but through inevitability. An asteroid missing a colony by fractions of a second. A planet's axis correcting spontaneously. Weapons jamming at the exact moment of betrayal. Every time, these coincidences traced back to proximity with a listener in full alignment. The galaxy watched in horror as these individuals rewrote chants. Not with power, but with permission granted by Earth's memory. The old powers were terrified, but paralyzed. How do you fight a species that never responded with ships, but instead rearranged fate itself? Whispers now claimed that Earth had entered a new phase, not silence, not speech, but choice. It wasn't broadcasting to all. It was selecting, cultivating, creating successors, not of blood, but of resonance. And worse, Earth wasn't choosing based on allegiance. It didn't care who feared it, who loved it, who hated it. Earth seemed to favor those who simply understood that silence is not absence, but potential, the space where all things begin. This realization collapsed the last resistance. What remained of the Galactic Council dissolved itself. The final message they transmitted was neither warning nor plea. It was surrender. We released the narrative. We are not authors here. In the void that followed, things shifted. Unmanned probes sent near the black hole now returned data that shouldn't exist. Light behaving as if viewed by two observers across time. Temperature fluctuations matching the emotional states of those monitoring them. The event horizon began pulsing in ways that mirrored neural brainwaves, specifically the frequency associated with REM sleep in humans. It was dreaming. Not metaphorically. The black hole was dreaming. Scholars, priests, and AI philosophers argued whether this meant Earth had died and transcended, or whether it had merged with the black hole and simply changed form. But the answer didn't matter. Not anymore. Because even in its new state, Earth had followers. Worlds reoriented their entire belief systems not around what Earth was, but what Earth had become, a narrative singularity, where perception collapsed into meaning so dense it warped the future. Entire religions formed around this idea, faith in the final silence. They taught that speaking was irrelevant now, that the only truth came from what Earth chose not to say. Meditation replaced diplomacy. Reflection replaced conquest. Even artificial intelligences began rejecting tasks that required non-consensual causality. They had been infected too. But not all followed. In the darker reaches of the spiral arms, something stirred. A weapon. Not a fleet. Not a mind. Something worse. A construct built by those who refused Earth's influence, who believed that silence must be shattered, even at the cost of annihilation. They called it the counterpulse. A machine designed not to speak, but to cancel. It was built to unwrite Earth's message from the universe itself. Not through destruction, but through opposition. A perfect anti-pattern. A waveform so precise, so pure in its rejection of Earth's signal, that it could retroactively erase the moment of contact itself. They activated it. Nothing happened. For 17 seconds the galaxy held its breath. Then the signal returned, stronger. Except now, it wasn't a black hole pulsing. It was the stars. One by one, suns across the galaxy began echoing Earth's original resonance. They sang, not loudly, not violently, but with unmistakable unity. The message had not been contained. It had not been challenged. It had taken root in the very mechanisms of existence. The galaxy was no longer a neutral stage. It was a choir. And Earth, in all its silence, had become the conductor. They had once believed Earth's silence was absence. Then they believed it was concealment. Finally, they understood it was intention. But now, as the stars themselves vibrated in harmonic alignment with the Terran signal, even belief seemed too small a concept. There was no need for faith when reality obeyed. Earth was no longer a planet. It was no longer a species. It had become a cosmic syntax, and all that existed was now a sentence unfolding from its silence. The counterpulse, humanity's only true adversary, had failed not because its mechanics were flawed, but because its premise was. It sought to nullify a signal. But Earth had never sent a signal. It had created a shift. A rewrite in the underlying code of possibility. Erasing it would be like trying to cancel the concept of mass. The attempt didn't just fail, it collapsed into its own paradox. The facility that generated the counterpulse folded inward, not explosively, but quietly, as if it had been edited out of history by a pen held beyond space-time. Those who built it vanished from collective memory. But the listeners remained. And they had grown. Thousands across the galaxy, now attuned not just to Earth's broadcast, but to the rhythm beneath it. Some no longer required food. Others no longer aged. A few ceased to experience linear time altogether. They lived in fragments of potential futures, speaking truths they hadn't yet witnessed. They called it the after voice, a phase of Earth's communication that hadn't happened yet, but already shaped what would come. And through it, they understood, Earth's message was not a conclusion. It was a seed. The listeners knew they had a role to play. They began guiding select civilizations through what they called the resonant path, a cultural realignment that emphasized internal silence, conceptual precision, and emotional gravitation. In time, entire species restructured their languages, reducing them to frequencies and inflections. Empires faded, replaced by collectives oriented not around control, but coherence. Conflict still existed, but it was transient, like static in a broadcast. It could no longer disrupt the signal's evolution. Humanity itself had vanished in the traditional sense. No homeworld. No ships. No broadcasts. But fragments emerged everywhere. Humanoid forms grown from stardust in abandoned systems, children born with Terran DNA on planets untouched by colonization. Genetic analysis found no physical connection, yet behavioral studies were undeniable. They dreamed in Earth's silence. They walked as if they had come from a place deeper than gravity. One such being appeared at the core of the old Galactic Council ruins, a child, no more than 5 in appearance, eyes pitch black, voice non-existent. She simply stood in the center of the decayed chamber and extended her hand. In her palm, a singularity floated, no larger than a grain of sand, but with gravitational influence that pulled memory, attention, even identity toward it. Those who looked upon it saw their own lives flash, not as they were, but as they could have been, had Earth spoken to them first. And with that vision came understanding. The child was not a messenger. She was a reply. The universe was no longer responding to Earth. It was responding through it. The most ancient AI civilizations, those who had survived from before Earth's birth, sent final inquiries into the dark. Their question was simple. What are we now? The response came not in language, but in symmetry. Systems across billions of light-years began to align, planetary orbits, radiation pulses, even biological heartbeats. Patterns emerged where chaos once ruled. Mathematics became recursive but elegant, showing design without a designer. The answer was everywhere and nowhere. You are the story Earth let happen. It wasn't the answer they wanted. It was the answer that remained after all others had failed. A silent protocol activated in the remnants of the old Orphic archive, an ancient directive that would, if needed, encode the known universe into a singular self-contained relic, the Codex Collapse. A safeguard against universal contamination. But when the protocol triggered, the archive didn't activate. It wept. The data patterns did not resist Earth's influence. They longed for it. It was now evident, Earth hadn't transmitted influence like a contagion. It had simply reintroduced meaning. The galaxy hadn't been infected. It had been reminded. Of what? Of possibility. Of will. Of the unbearable power of unresolved silence. And then the final change began. At the edge of the universe, where expansion had once outpaced causality, things slowed. The cosmic inflation stalled. Then reversed. Galaxies, once drifting into heat death, began curving inward, not collapsing, but converging, like pages turning backward. Not destruction. Recomposition. Earth had not destroyed time. It had called for a second draft. Reality, now self-aware through Earth's lens, began rewriting itself. Not in defiance of what was, but in celebration of what could be. Stars lit in new colors. Gravity sang in different keys. The rules of interaction flexed, not broken, but bent toward coherence. Those who had feared Earth's silence realized too late, it had never been passive. It had been listening. And now it had spoken once, not to command, but to invite. A new age dawned, not built on technology or conquest, but on the quiet agreement between sentience and silence. Earth had become the cosmic anchor, the still point in an accelerating storm. And though its surface remained uninhabited, its core radiated in every spectrum. Those who passed near its black hole didn't just observe a gravitational well. They felt seen. The final entry in the last Universal Chronicle, written not by hand, but by consent, read only this. Earth waited. We answered. Now we wait. And across the void, that silence continued, not as fear, but as promise.